What if I told you that Hamilton's first podium with Ferrari in China is not the news, but Rosberg's reaction to seeing him perform like that? Because what he said is not normal, and it could mean that we are about to see something that Formula One was not prepared to face again. It all begins in China, but not as just another race on the calendar, but as the first real scenario where all the narratives that have been building since the beginning of this new stage of Hamilton with Ferrari intersect. Because you have to understand something key. This podium does not appear out of nowhere. It is the result of a long, uncomfortable process full of doubts that dragged on since 2025, where the British never finished feeling completely at home within the team, where even the internal comparisons with Leclerc left more questions than answers. And if we look back, the beginning of this story was not exactly promising. In Australia, for example, Hamilton's debut with Ferrari was far from ideal, with adaptation problems, questionable strategic decisions, and a general feeling that the project was still very green. He himself recognized it. The car did not respond as he expected, his driving style needed adjustments, and the connection with the team was not yet at that fine point that makes the difference between competing and dominating. But what happens between then and China is what really changes the course of everything. Because little by little, almost without making a sound, Hamilton begins to rebuild itself. He starts to adapt his driving, but more importantly, he starts to make Ferrari adapt to him too. And this detail is fundamental, because historically, when Hamilton manages to influence the technical direction of the car, it is when it reaches its most dangerous level. It's not just about riding well, it's about creating an environment where everything works around you. We then arrive at the 2026 Chinese Grand Prix, the first real big thermometer of the season on a complete, demanding circuit, where there are no longer excuses or half-interpretations. And here the context is brutal. Mercedes arrives strong, with Antonelli taking the victory and Russell securing the double, making it clear that they have the most complete car at that moment. Ferrari, on the other hand, is still in pursuit, still without that pure performance to fight head-to-head under normal conditions. And it is precisely in that scenario where Hamilton signs one of those performances that cannot be measured only in results. Because he starts in an unfavorable position with respect to Mercedes, he has to fight directly with his own teammate, Charles Leclerc, in a duel without concessions, and even so he manages to prevail with a combination of aggressiveness and control that perfectly defines what it means to be an elite driver. He doesn't win the race, but he does something just as important. He maximizes absolutely everything he had available. The start is key, the tire management is impeccable, but what really makes the difference is the race reading. That ability to understand when to attack, when to defend, how to position yourself in each phase of the stint. That is not trained, that is pure experience. And that is where that Hamilton that seemed lost the previous year begins to appear, the one that turns normal situations into extraordinary results. And while all this is happening on the track, off it another equally important story begins to be built. Because the analyses, comments, and reactions do not focus only on the podium. They focus on how he achieved it. And this is where Rosberg's reaction begins to take hold, because what he sees is not simply a good weekend, it is the beginning of something much bigger. But if there is a moment where everything really changes, it is not on the track, it is off it. Because while many simply see a hard-fought podium, Nico Rosberg sees something completely different. And that's where this story becomes much more serious. Rosberg does not react like just another commentator, nor like a former driver impressed by a good performance. His reaction has a much deeper nuance, almost uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. Because he doesn't just analyze the result, he analyzes the pattern. And that pattern is exactly the same one that he experienced firsthand when he shared a team with Hamilton at Mercedes. What it detects is not a specific performance peak, but the beginning of a dangerous phase, that moment in which Lewis stops adapting and begins to build mastery. And here is the key to everything. Rosberg is practically stunned not by the podium itself, but by the speed at which Hamilton has managed to transform his situation within Ferrari. We were coming from a 2025 where the Briton was uncomfortable, where he needed to modify his style to get closer to Leclerc's performance, where there were even real doubts about whether that team change had been the right one. But in China all that disappears suddenly, and not progressively but decisively. What Rosberg interprets and hears that Hamilton is no longer chasing the car. Now the car begins to rotate around Hamilton. And when that happens, when the engineers manage to translate exactly what the driver needs into real performance on the track, the level rises in a way that is not linear. It is exponential. That's why his reaction carries that warning tone. Because he knows better than anyone what it means to face a Hamilton in that state. It's not just fast, it's not just constant. It's relentless. He minimizes mistakes. maximizes opportunities, and, most dangerously, starts winning even when he doesn't have the best car. And what we saw in China fits that description perfectly. Ferrari was not at the level of Mercedes, but Hamilton still gets on the podium running an almost perfect race. And this is where the message becomes uncomfortable for the rest of the teams. Because if Hamilton is already capable of doing this in the chase phase, what will happen when Ferrari really rises to the occasion? That is the question that Rosberg leaves in the air without needing to say it directly. In addition, there is a detail that further increases the magnitude of this reaction: the emotional connection. Rosberg does not speak from theory, he speaks from the direct experience of having had to face him in his best version. And when someone like that uses terms close to amazement to describe what they are seeing, it means that they recognize very specific signs that not everyone is able to identify. At this point, the narrative has already completely changed. It's no longer about Hamilton's first podium with Ferrari, it's about what that podium represents. It is about understanding that, according to Rosberg's reading, this could be the real beginning of a new dominant stage if Ferrari manages to take the next step. And right here is where everything is left open. Because the big question is no longer what has happened in China, but what is about to happen next. And this is where everything becomes really disturbing. Because if a simple podium has provoked this reaction in Rosberg, then the problem is no longer what we have seen, but what we have not yet seen. Because from this moment on, Formula One enters a completely different area. We are no longer talking about adaptation or progress, or even punctual performance. We are talking about a possible transition towards a scenario where Hamilton once again is that factor that determines absolutely everything. Strategies, development, psychological pressure, and, above all, the narrative of the championship. What China leaves behind is not just a good race, it is a silent warning. Ferrari still doesn't have the best car, that has become clear against Mercedes, but now it has something that can be equally or even more dangerous. A driver completely aligned with his machine. And that combination, historically, has been the starting point of all of Hamilton's dominant stages. Because when Hamilton reaches this level, there is a change that is not always seen in the data, but in the behavior on the track. He begins to anticipate everything, to read the races with superior clarity, to execute seamlessly, and most importantly, to put constant pressure on his rivals. You no longer need to have the fastest car every weekend because you force others to make mistakes. And that's where championships are won. This is exactly what Rosberg is anticipating. He doesn't say it directly, but he makes it clear between the lines. If this is Hamilton's new starting point with Ferrari, then the rest of the grid has a serious problem. Because right now they are competing against a version that is still growing, that still has room, and that is already capable of achieving results above the real capabilities of the car. And there is another factor that changes everything: time. The season is just beginning, and that means Ferrari has room to evolve, to close the gap with Mercedes, to fine-tune that SF26 even further. And if that happens while Hamilton continues on this upward trajectory, the balance of power could break at any moment. So the big question is no longer whether Hamilton can fight for victories again. The real question is, how long until he starts doing so consistently? Because if what Rosberg saw is correct, then China was not an isolated point. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Because if the recent history of Formula One has shown anything, it is that no dominance is born without resistance. And what Hamilton has activated in China does not go unnoticed within the paddock. Teams like Mercedes, which have already shown they have the most complete car at the moment, understand perfectly what this change means. They are no longer facing a Hamilton in reconstruction. They are facing a Hamilton who is beginning to maximize, to bother, to press from a position where he should not be in theory. And this generates an immediate effect. It forces everyone to accelerate their own processes. Because now it is no longer enough to be fast, now they need to be perfect. Every strategic error, every bad decision in the pits, every mistake in qualifying, can be punished by a driver who has returned to that state where he forgives absolutely nothing. And that completely changes the dynamics of the championship. But there is something even deeper that is beginning to develop, something that Rosberg also hints at with his reaction: the psychological factor. Because the drivers know who Hamilton is, they know what he has done in the past when he finds rhythm, and they know that if he starts to chain results, the pressure multiplies. Fighting against a fast car is not the same as fighting against a figure who historically has turned small advantages into cycles of dominance. And here Ferrari enters a completely new position. For years, the team has been questioned for its lack of consistency, for strategic errors, for not knowing how to close opportunities. But now, with Hamilton beginning to take competitive and emotional control of the project, that narrative may change. Because he not only brings performance on the track, He brings structure, mentality, and a way of executing on the weekends that can elevate the entire team. However, not everything is so simple, because this scenario also puts Ferrari under brutal pressure. Now expectations change. It's no longer about building, it's about responding. If they have a Hamilton at this level, they are obliged to give him a car capable of fighting for victories consistently. And that is where it will really define how far this story can go. So we enter the most delicate phase of all, confirmation. Because we have already seen the sign, we have already seen the reaction, we have already seen the impact. But now comes the most difficult part, sustaining it over time. And that is the great unknown that remains in the air. Has this been the beginning of a new era, or just the most dangerous flash before reality returns to balance everything? Because what we have seen is not simply Hamilton getting on the podium with Ferrari, it is the exact moment in which all the pieces begin to fall into place. It is the point where adaptation stops being an excuse and becomes a real threat for the entire grid. And the most important thing is that we are not saying it, it is being made clear by someone who knows perfectly how this phenomenon works. Rosberg. His reaction is not casual, it is not exaggerated, it is a warning based on experience. He has seen this story before, he has already experienced what happens when Hamilton reaches that level of connection with his car, and that is why his surprise carries so much weight. Because it recognizes signs that for many still go unnoticed, but that historically have always ended in the same thing: dominance. Right now Ferrari doesn't have the best car, but it has something that can change everything if it evolves in the right direction. You have a Hamilton who is no longer looking for answers, he is finding them. And when that happens, the margin of error for everyone else disappears completely. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.